Welcome back to Us Against Everything. I'm your psychic host, Liz.
And I'm Landon.
And today we're going down one of those rabbit holes where the further you go, the more you start wondering what the actual fuck is happening. Because this story has everything. A real military base, secret government experiments, mind control, psychic ability, children being used in experiments, people claiming their memories being erased, underground facilities, time travel, portals, and eventually a monster.
And of course, there's always a monster.
Of course there is.
And today we're going to be talking about the Montauk Project. And here's what makes this conspiracy so fascinating. The place at the center of it all actually exists. Camp Hero is a real former military installation in Montauk, New York, and that is where reality ends. And things start getting fucking weird because years later, people began claiming that what the public knew about Camp Hero was only part of the story. And according to the conspiracy, secret experiments continued there involving mind control, psychological manipulation, psychic abilities, and eventually experiments that involved space and time itself.
It's almost like if Stranger Things happened.
Because it did.
This real life experience, craziness is all based off of the show Stranger Things. So if it sounds familiar, you know why. Now, before we get into this, we are going to talk about three separate things. What actually happened, what people have claimed, and then later on, Landon and I are going to talk about it, tell you how we feel, because some of what we're talking about has never been proven. Some of it sounds completely insane. I'm already looking at Landon thinking, how much do you trust the government?
Not even a little bit.
Exactly. So we're starting with the part that we know is real.
That's real right there?
Because before there was Montauk Project, there was Camp Hero.
Now, as we stated before, Camp Hero is real. That's probably the first thing people need to know, because when you hear Montauk Project, it sounds like we're starting with something completely made up. And we're not. Camp Hero is at Montauk Point, right at the eastern end of Long Island, New York.
Which is so fascinating.
I fucking love New York. I love New York. I fucking love New York.
Now, during World War II, the military actually used this area to help protect New York from a potential attack. Apparently, they didn't want it looking like a military basey looking.
Military base.
And some of the buildings were intentionally designed to resemble civilian buildings, basically camouflaging the military installation so it doesn't scream, "Hey, come bomb this."
Which is pretty genius. Too bad we don't use those kinds of genius moments in current day things.
You would have to have somebody with brains to do that.
Good point. And it is completely understandable. And when we're researching a conspiracy about secret government experiments, and the first thing you learn is, yeah, they purposely made the place look like something it wasn't. Come on.
It's definitely not suspicious. Not even at all.
Nothing to see here, folks. Then World War II ends. Hooray. But Camp Hero doesn't just disappear.
During the Cold War, the Air Force operated the area as Montauk Air Force Station. And that is where one of the creepiest parts of Camp Hero comes in. The gigantic radar tower.
If you've ever seen pictures of this place, you know exactly what we're talking about. That thing looks like somebody built a giant satellite dish, like Mario Land kind of satellite dish, specifically for communicating with aliens.
Dun dun dun. But no, really, come and save us.
Please.
The radar tower is an AN FPS 35 radar.
Whatever that is.
Its actual purpose was detecting aircraft at long range. Now remember, this is the Cold War, so the United States is watching for potential Soviet Union attacks.
I mean, all well and said and done. So now imagine being somebody living around the Montauk area back then. There's restricted military property, a giant radar installation, military personnel, equipment you probably don't understand. And because it's the Cold War, they're obviously not explaining everything they're doing.
And let's just point out real quick, this is a radar tower, which is giving off extensive amounts of radiation to detect things going on. So when we're going to be talking about monsters, time travel, and psychic abilities, all things that can mutate due to radiation going out in the water and in the air that we breathe.
Yeah, that would be bad. And imagine like you're a kid fucking around with your friends, like throwing rocks, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, let's go egg this house here, and it's really like military base. You're gonna get nuked, honestly. At least if it was this day. Eventually, the military shuts the place down, thank God, or do they? The Air Force station closes in the early 1980s. It took that long. And today, much of that property is Camp Hero State Park, as it should be. End of story, right?
Except that is not the story people tell about Montauk.
Not even close. Because according to the conspiracy, Camp Hero didn't really shut down. Something allegedly continued underneath.
I'm so shocked.
And years later, one man came forward claiming he remembered being part of the whole thing. His name was Preston Nichols.
Welcome in, Preston Nichols. Nichols was an electrical engineer who claimed that he had actually worked on secret experiments at Montauk, but there was just one little problem.
He didn't remember doing it, which is a hell of a way to start a story.
Nichols claimed that memories of his involvement had essentially been blocked or suppressed, and that over time, those memories started to come back.
And apparently, they came back with a lot of information, because this wasn't just, oh yeah, I remember working at Camp Hero. No, this man eventually claimed that he remembered a secret project involving mind control, psychic abilities, manipulating people's thoughts, and eventually fucking around with space and time.
Always the government wanting to time travel.
Right? Is it like Elon?
Right. And in 1992, Preston Nichols and Peter Moon published a book called The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. And that's the book that really helped turn these stories into the Montauk conspiracy we know and love today.
And that is really important because sometimes you'll hear the Montauk Project being talked about, like we have government documents providing all of it. Unfortunately, we don't, but I don't know. Maybe they're hidden away somewhere.
Definitely hidden away.
A huge amount of this story comes from Nichols and people connected to these claims.
There is no independently verified evidence proving that the extraordinary experiments described in the Montauk story actually happened, but when someone's memories start coming back, it's kind of hard to ignore that.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I've always been a believer of that memory eraser thing, and I do believe that we have one today, but I also believe we had one back then. Of course, it didn't work as well. People started remembering things.
Clearly, somebody started remembering, like they probably obviously advanced the technology, but you have been talking about this for years, which I also don't put it past the government to have something like that.
Right. They're trying to also scare their people too. Like, oh, we erased your memory, but if you remember, don't fucking say shit. If you do, we're coming after you like Keefe D and Orlando after Tupac.
Shit, dude.
Facts. Now, according to him, the experiments weren't happening in the abandoned buildings everybody could see. Supposedly, there was a much larger operation hidden underground. Another big fucking shock.
Shocking!
And people could go into Camp Hero without the public knowing what was actually happening beneath them. Smart, secret underground bases. Because why is there always an underground base?
Never fucking shocked. I'm going to assume there's at least like 400 underground bases across the U.S., and that is just in the U.S. alone.
Whatever, but Nickel wasn't just claiming there were secret rooms underground. He claimed researchers were like experimenting with the human mind. And eventually he described a piece of technology that has become probably the most famous part of the entire Montauk conspiracy. Something called the Montauk Chair.
Wow.
Creative.
Right. What an awesome name. And no, it wasn't just a chair, if you are asking.
And apparently not, because according to the story, you put the right psychic person into this thing, and their thoughts didn't necessarily stay inside of their heads. We have officially reached the chair.
According to Preston Nichols, researchers at Montauk supposedly developed something called the Montauk Chair, and the idea was that a person with strong psychic abilities could sit in this chair while technology would amplify their brain activity.
Basically, take a psychic,
This legend.
Me.
hook them up to a machine, and turn up the volume. What could possibly go wrong?
Apparently everything, because Nichols claimed that the technology was connected to equipment at the facility, including radio and radar technology, and could supposedly take thoughts from the person sitting in the chair and then amplify them out.
Like 11?
Bingo!
They weren't just trying to read someone's thoughts. They wanted to do something with them.
Researchers experimented with influencing people's minds, changing their moods, planting thoughts, and also manipulating human behavior.
Like, why? Which is already creepy enough. Except eventually the claims became much bigger because certain people sitting in this chair could concentrate on something, and then the machine would just somehow make that thought physically manifest.
Well, everything is made of particles, so when you get a big machine to amplify someone's thoughts, let's say 11 with the demi-dog, she thinks about the demi-dog, she sees the demi-dogs, and then this machine will bring all the particles together to form that demi-dog, just like they did with the shadow monster. Now, let's think about that, what that would mean if this was possible.
Well, thank you, Bill Nye the Science Guy.
You're not just reading someone's mind anymore now. As I said, you are now taking something that exists inside their imagination, like the demi-dog, and you're going to bring that into reality with a bunch of particles.
Nope, absolutely fucking not. And one person becomes extremely important to this part of the story, and his name is Duncan Cameron.
Now, Nichols claimed Cameron had unusually powerful psychic abilities and became one of the main people that would sit in the Montauk Chair.
And, allegedly, Duncan could focus on a person, object, or even another place while sitting in that chair. And eventually, the experiment went beyond influencing minds, like way beyond. Because Nichols claimed they discovered the chair could potentially affect time itself.
Which is where the story now stops being about mind control.
Comes a time machine conspiracy. I also want to point out here that, his details are so detailed that it's almost like if you don't believe him, dude, is the best liar in the world. You know what I mean?
Too many details to be fictional.
And it makes sense. The way it's positioned, it all makes sense. Anyway, they opened something because anytime you fuck with time, entities, space, psychic energy, enhancing it, you're gonna open up a portal. Portals just come very easily, especially when you're looking for trouble. People involved in this story would eventually find or call it a time tunnel. And if you're thinking this story couldn't possibly get any crazier, well, we haven't sent you through it all yet. So apparently mind control wasn't enough because now we're fucking around with time.
And according to the Montauk story, researchers supposedly discovered that the technology connected to Duncan Cameron and the Montauk Chair could create what they described as a time tunnel. The idea was that Duncan could supposedly focus on a particular time or a place while using the chair, and then an opening could be created to that tunnel.
And like, they're like, yay, let's open this tunnel. Like, who cares what it does? Who cares what the side effects are? You know, it sounds absolutely ridiculous until you remember that we're talking about a conspiracy involving a government putting psychics in chairs. We're already crossing the ridiculous bridge. And I know it sounds crazy, but let's continue on.
Nichols claimed they eventually became capable of creating a stable enough tunnel that people could actually enter through it.
Can you imagine being the person to volunteer to walk through a tunnel that may just disappear at any point?
If I was single and not married and in love, I would do it.
There is a huge difference between we made someone hallucinate another place to we physically sent somebody somewhere.
Definitely is. Now, according to the story, people were supposedly sent through these tunnels to different locations and different points in time. There even are stories about people being sent into the future.
Imagine being the first person they ask. Hey, Catherine. We're opening up a mysterious black hole underneath the military base. Want to crawl inside and then grab some lunch after? No. Give that job to somebody else.
But the Montauk story goes even further because Nichols claimed there was something strange about the date August 12, 1983. Supposedly, the experiments created a connection between Montauk in 1983 and another government experiment from decades earlier.
I was only like 4 months old at this time. Also want to point out this psychic was, available. Thankfully, no one took me though. Now Montauk gets connected to another huge situation.
The Philadelphia experiment.
And according to that conspiracy, the U.S. Navy conducted a secret experiment during World War II involving a ship called the USS Eldridge. Now that story says that they were trying to make the ship invisible. Something allegedly went horribly wrong.
And decades later, people involved in the Montauk story would claim these two experiments weren't separate at all.
But they're 40 years apart. 2 different locations. One experiment in 43, one in 83. And somehow the same doorway? Although now we have to explain the Philadelphia experiment a little bit because Montauk basically reaches backward 40 years and grabs another conspiracy theory.
The Philadelphia experiment allegedly happened in 1943 and involved the USS Eldridge, a Navy destroyer escort. According to the legend, the military was experimenting with technology that could make a ship invisible.
And not invisible like we're harder to see on the radar. This ship disappeared into thin air. Fucking gone.
Now, stories claim the Eldridge became surrounded by a strange fog or glow, vanished from Philadelphia, and then appeared somewhere else before returning. Even more disturbing stories later claimed crew members became sick, mentally unstable, and some were somehow physically fused into parts of the ship.
Which is horrifying, but also kind of makes sense because if
you're fucking with space and time
and radiation towers,
right? All kinds of things that, of course, are gonna fuck up some people being melted into the ship,
right?
But here is where Montauk comes in. One of the men central to the Montauk story, Duncan Cameron, was supposedly connected to the Philadelphia experiment as well.
And immediately we have a problem because Duncan Cameron couldn't normally be working on a Navy ship in 43 and then be the same age decades later at Montauk. How does that conspiracy work?
The Montauk story claims Duncan and his brother Edward Cameron were aboard the Eldridge during the Philadelphia experiment. Edward Cameron is also connected to the mythology to another famous name, Al Bielek.
And apparently, Al said that he was actually Edward Cameron. And according to his story, he and Duncan jumped from Eldridge during the 1943 experiment, and instead of landing in the water, they ended up on the Montauk.
In 1983, 40 years into the future.
So basically, they were boomeranged into the future because we went back in time to fuck with that ship, make it disappear, and then somehow managed to come.
Unless, like in Stranger Things, when they explain in the last season, the bridge. And
Fuck the bridge.
Well, the bridge is the tunnel. So, theoretically, Duncan is in the chair at the bottom of the tunnel, and the ship to the Philadelphia experiment is at the other end of the tunnel. Theoretically, when Edward, aka Al, and Duncan jump off the ship into what they believe is water, they actually jumped into the tunnel and went down into Montauk. Theoretically, that is what they're saying.
Okay, I got you now. Thank you again for explaining it, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Imagine jumping off a Navy ship during World War II and coming out underneath Camp Hero while somebody is sitting in a psychic chair. This conspiracy gives me absolutely no time to recover.
None. And according to the story, this wasn't a coincidence. Like I said, the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project had supposedly created two ends of the same phenomenon. One in 1943 and the other in 1983, that bridge.
Why did we skip 1953, 1963, 1973?
Well, because it had to be 40 years apart and two extraordinary phenomenons.
Which is where August 12th date becomes important, I guess. The Montauk story claims that on the 12th, the connection between those 2 points in time had to be broken. And Duncan Cameron was involved in shutting down the whole thing. Superhero much?
Right now, before Montauk supposedly ended, there's another part of the conspiracy that we haven't talked about.
Because forget ships and time machines for a minute. This story also claims the government needed human test subjects. When have they ever done that?
Never. Not the government.
And according to the people telling this story, some of those subjects were children.
Dun dun dun.
The so-called Montauk boys. Of course, it's always boys. According to the Montauk conspiracy, researchers weren't only experimenting on adults. They also used kids.
They often referred to the conspiracy as the Montauk Boys. The allegation is that the boys were brought into the program and subjected to psychological and mind control experiments.
I mean, okay, we're gonna call everything boys. I'm a girl, I have abilities, but whatever.
Some versions claim vulnerable children were deliberately targeted because they would be easier to manipulate and less likely to be believed if they ever talked about what happened. Other stories claim researchers were specifically searching for children who showed unusual psychic abilities.
I have to point this out because I found it quite interesting. There was a boy, age 5, Robert Bobby Joe Fritz. He was 5, like I said, vanished May 14th, 1983, while playing outside of his home in Campbellsport, Wisconsin. His case is actually getting renewed attention right now, but his remains were never found. Then we have another kid, Jason Keith Canyon, age 2, disappeared March 16th, 83, outside of his apartment in Boise, Idaho. Again, never been found. A couple of kids just went missing randomly. I just had to point that out. Never found again. Who knows? Maybe they're connected.
They probably are. And I mean, look at the world happening now today. I mean, not every child is being taken into a sex ring. Some are still being taken for government experiments. Why is the government so heavily focused on certain children?
Exactly. They're not random test subjects. They're looking for particular minds. Kids who might be intuitive, psychic, telepathic, along with the Men in Black, working with the UFO side. I believe that the other part of the Men in Black is to find out anyone in the world that has any sort of abilities, gifts like that, and report it to the government. And I think that's something that kind of happened at that point too, and still happens to this day.
I believe that 100%. The claims include psychological conditioning, attempts at mind control, and deliberately creating trauma. Some people who later identified themselves as Montauk survivors claimed their memories had been suppressed, just like Mr. Nichols.
Just like Mr. Nichols, which creates one of the biggest problems with investigating this entire story. If somebody says, I don't have records because it's classified and I don't remember because they erased my memories, how the hell do you prove or disprove their entire story.
That's very difficult, but I think there is proof, and I think those memories will come back. And that is part of why the Montauk has survived as a conspiracy for such a long time. The explanation for the lack of evidence becomes part of the conspiracy itself, or what the government tells us.
And I think that's something we need to absolutely remember. So guys, if anyone was connected to this, even your grandparents, go listen to their stories, especially in that area. Anyone from Montauk, go talk to your grandparents. See what the hell's up. Maybe they know something.
The Montauk boy story also became connected to another claim. The experiments weren't just about controlling people. Researchers supposedly wanted to see whether certain minds could be used to create things.
And unfortunately, we're about to bring Duncan Cameron back because according to the story, they eventually told him to use the Montauk Chair and imagine something from the inside of his subconscious. And, because Duncan's subconscious wasn't thinking about puppies.
Not quite.
Because according to this legend, something else appeared. Something huge. Something violent. Something they couldn't control.
Big shock there when you're overusing someone's abilities. Now, before everyone gets excited, this is not the animal carcass nicknamed the Montauk Monster. That was washed up on the beach in 2008. This is a different Montauk Monster.
Apparently, Montauk had enough weird shit that has to be specified which monster we're talking about. We're talking about the creature created during the Montauk Project.
Now, according to Preston Nichols' version of this story, by August 1983, Duncan Cameron had reached the point where he wanted these experiments to completely stop. And supposedly, he decided he was going to sabotage them.
Again, became L in the story. His method was completely reasonable. He would sit in the Montauk chair and basically think, you want something from my mind? Here we go.
Nichols claimed Duncan focused on a creature from somewhere deep within his subconscious. The chair supposedly amplified that thought, and something physically appeared inside the facility.
I can picture it. A giant creature, because apparently Duncan couldn't manifest a hamster.
Nichols described it as enormous, hairy, dangerous. According to the story, it began destroying equipment and attacking the facility. The beast from the great unknown.
Sounds like my ex-husband after getting up from a nap. Seriously, it's actually creepy as hell. Fear, aggression, desire, the shit underneath all the rational thinking. So according to the story, Duncan didn't just imagine some random monster, he pulled something out of the darkest parts of his subconscious. And the machine made it very real.
And allegedly, they couldn't stop it normally. Nichols claimed the equipment powering the experiment ultimately had to be shut down. Once the system was disconnected, the creature would just disappear, right?
Which means if we're following the thing that finally destroys this massive secret government project, it isn't Congress. It is one pissed off psychic manifesting a fucking monster.
And shutting down the chair did something much more important. The experiments ended. The time tunnel collapsed, and the connection to 1943 was broken.
And that should be the end of the Montauk Project, except there's one massive question left. If all of this actually happened, what the hell is the evidence? Because Camp Hero is real, the radar is real, the military story/history is real, but psychic chairs, missing kids, time tunnels, monster. So now Landen and I have one extremely reasonable question. Where's the proof? Hello, MK Ultra. That's why I don't automatically laugh when somebody says the government secretly experimented on people's minds, because unfortunately, we already know they did.
Right, we do have some proof out there. MK Ultra being one of them. It was a real CIA program involving researchers in research into behavioral modification and mind control. It included experiments involving drugs such as LSD. Some people were experimented on without informed consent, that isn't a conspiracy theory. That is actual documented history.
Right. And there's one more reason this conspiracy refuses to die. Because decades later, a little television show called Stranger Things with psychic children and monsters from other dimensions all came out.
But it wasn't originally called Stranger Things. It was called Montauk.
Okay, Stranger Things fan, this part's for you. The psychic children, the secret experiments, a monster created through someone's mind. Why does this all sound familiar?
Before it became Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers originally developed this show under the little title Montauk.
Fucking Montauk. The original concept was actually supposed to take place in Montauk, New York, not Hawkins, Indiana.
Early concept involved a child disappearing, secret government experiments, and supernatural activity connected to a mysterious facility. Eventually, the location was changed to a fictional town called Hawkins, and the project then became Stranger Things.
Because God forbid we call out the government for what they're actually doing.
Right, they probably wouldn't greenlight the project.
Which means if you've watched 11 sitting inside of a laboratory using psychic abilities, kids being experimented on, government scientists doing some shady shit, portals opening, and something horrible coming through, now you understand why we've spent this entire episode talking about Montauk.
Because there is some truth to things, and I feel like because the Duffer Brothers couldn't secure the actual Camp Hero, aka Montauk base, as a filming location, leads me to believe there's more to the story that they don't want us to know.
Absolutely. Now we're going to get into the question side of things, and Landon is up first. I genuinely want to know what you think. So my first and most important question is, do you think the Montauk Project actually existed in some form, or do you think Preston made the whole thing up?
No, I definitely believe that it exists because I know for a fact the facility exists in New York. And like I said earlier in the episode, I don't believe that Preston knowing all of these details is just some like fictional made up thing that he just like magically wrote a book about.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. It had to come from somewhere. If you think something did happen at Camp Hero, what do you think that they were experimenting with?
Everything. I think they were experimenting with children, mind control, telepathy, moving cars, moving things, wanting to move things through space and this tunnel. And I genuinely think that they wanted to bring things like maybe even a dinosaur or something back. They wanted to see if they can move through time and space. Easily.
And they thought that they would use psychics, which is probably where psychics have gotten bad names because we weren't interested in cooperating with their government bullshit.
Right. No one wants to be strapped to a chair.
Now, do you think that Preston Nichols genuinely believed his recovered memories were real, even if everything he remembered wasn't necessarily true?
I think everything he remembered was true, and they are just fucking with him and trying to tell him it's not true. And I believe that his recovered memories were definitely real. And I think that he also stopped talking. I think that he didn't reveal everything because he was afraid of what might happen to him or others if he told more of what happened. Because I believe there is still something sitting down there in the deep depths underground of the Montauk.
Ooh. Well, you know what I was also thinking? They probably didn't come after him because he had such an audience on this, but I guarantee that he was absolutely silenced, as you say. I agree with you there. What about the underground facility? Do you think there could actually have been classified areas underneath Camp Hero that the public didn't know about?
Abso-fucking-lutely. Abso-fucking-lutely. I think that we only know about maybe one section of what we talked about was where they had the chair. I think there was multiple other things going on at that facility, multiple other beings, non-beings, weird things all down there, experiments on things that they've brought through those portals, all things we don't know about and probably still trapped down there.
Right. And like, as a psychic myself, it's incredibly draining to do this type of stuff. And they have to teach those kids and adults on how to control their abilities. So there was probably like a whole training center, you know?
I believe exactly what happens in Stranger Things if you watch the entire series, when Eleven goes back in her memories of the times where she was with Papa and they were in those training sessions trying to hurt each other and psychically attack each other. I'm sure all of that was all truth.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they gave these children number names too.
Right, number names, and also gave them little treats like candies and stuff, because when you strip somebody of everything, a little piece of candy is going to make them hurt somebody. I think a lot of the things in the show is very, very accurate to what happened, because you need to drive somebody to want to do those things to people. And how do you do that? Mind control.
Well, the Montauk boys, do you think there's any vulnerable kids who were secretly used in these experiments?
I do, but I also don't think that they were just boys. Again, going back to Stranger Things, if you watch it, every single person there, all the kids, boys, girls, didn't matter. They all had shaved heads because it was easier to put those things on them, you know, electrodes on their brains with no hair.
Do you believe technology could ever amplify someone's abilities the way it's supposedly happened in the Montauk Chair?
Yeah, I do think that we have technologies to do that. And the government definitely never would tell us if we did or didn't.
I already know how you feel about time travel, but I mean, do you genuinely feel like it is possible?
Yes, I believe that we have a time machine, or did have a time machine, underneath Niagara Falls that was created by Nikola Tesla.
Ooh. Now, do you think humans have discovered time that the government doesn't necessarily know about?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. But maybe the government does know.
I mean, it's true. They somehow
government
managed to know
knows
everything. Yeah, exactly.
All right, now the tables have turned.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's now your turn for questions.
All right, give them to me.
When you focus specifically on Camp Hero, do you see or feel that classified activity continued there beyond what the public was told?
I'm going to go with yes. And even after the facility closed, I don't necessarily think it closed. I just think it was relocated because people were starting to ask questions.
Ding, ding, ding. Now, do you see an underground area connected to Camp Hero that hasn't fully been explained publicly?
So many areas. So like you had said, there's like the area where they keep the children, the area where they keep the adults, the area that they use the equipment to like have scientists figure out the things to do. Grab some children, grab some adults, grab some people, test the machine, make sure it works, yada, yada, yada. Oh, they noticed little Timmy does better than Juliet over there, or Sandra does better than Michael over there. They're going to go ahead and use that ability. And yeah, not only that, I feel like, and this is going to sound odd, but here we go. I also feel like they were hiding other people with other abilities and also aliens down there as well.
That's why I said other things down there. Aliens, weird beasts, maybe mythical creatures, experimenting on humanoid stuff.
Here's where what I am seeing. I am seeing a tall gray on a table, and then I am seeing this chair that this child is sitting in. And they're using the tall gray to enhance that child's ability. And also over on corner to the left, you're going to see what is happening, like the results. Like, okay, so said child thinks of something small, like a cheesecake. It's going to come up, it'll make a cheesecake, it'll be edible, that kind of thing. Then they see a puppy. Then they move on to things like ships and monsters.
Now, when you focus on Preston Nichols, do you feel he genuinely experienced something connected to Montauk, or was he just creating a story?
I believe that Preston was like the only one willing to talk about this. Like, I feel like he went up to a few of his old friends and, you know, the biz, like, hey, cuz, what's up? Used to work together. Remember when we used to fuck with people's psychic abilities? That was fun. And the guy was like, what are you talking about, Preston? And he was like, oh shit, so I'm the only one to remember. But in reality, I think they were just trying to protect themselves. So yes, I absolutely believe that Preston, everything he felt true, and also feel like there are things he still doesn't remember and didn't remember.
Were any of his memories deliberately altered, suppressed, or manipulated?
I feel like at some point, like I said, they used the memory eraser on him. So unfortunately, there's like blotches of time. I don't necessarily feel like they were manipulated, but he might not remember the whole story.
Do you see psychics or people believed to have unusual intuitive abilities being studied?
Yes. Unfortunately, back in the day when there were rumors of witches or rumors of people that have mind control or any sort of abnormal thing, kind of like, the show Heroes, ironically enough, they would get monitored and the government would be watching. Do they do that as much now? No, because there's like 400 million people that claim to be psychic. Back in the day, it wasn't so popular.
Was there ever technology at Montauk designed to interact with or amplify the human mind?
That's where I think that alien machine is coming from. So yes, I believe that it was all part of the same thing. And I believe that us capturing this alien is the reason it got us to this point in the first place.
When you focus specifically on the Montauk Chair, do you see anything resembling it actually existing?
Yes, I also see that there are like multiple, and maybe not used all at the same time, but I feel like there was chair 1 and then chair 2 and then chair 3. At some point it was probably like a fucking little stool, and then it eventually became a recliner. I feel like they continued to enhance it over a few years while this world war was going on.
When you focus on the alleged time tunnel, what do you see? An actual physical portal, an altered consciousness, experimental technology, or nothing at all?
I feel like it's a combination of multiple things. I feel like there was a portal. I do feel like it opened. I absolutely believe that it would like glitch in and out. So like if somebody went through that thing, they could potentially get stuck maybe in the in-between, or the upside down.
No, don't want to be stuck in the upside down.
Right, exactly, where nothing exists except everything that lives in the darkest depths of your mind. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. If it was me, I would probably have a lot of serial killers running around in my subconscious mind, chasing me with knives all day and all night. Maybe a few planes and, all my fears. It would be your own psychic fear, whoever's mind was being manipulated. So yeah, I feel like a lot of these things were happening and people were able to, and people did get stuck along the way, unfortunately.
Can you help me out?
Is there any genuine connection between what happened at Montauk and the Philadelphia experiment?
I do. I also feel like we didn't even get to the future part of things either. I believe that we went backwards even further from 43 all the way to something else. But I also feel like we went forward as well. I don't even think we've gotten to the year yet that we moved forward to. So yes, I believe that something unusual will happen for us in the future that has already happened, but the time travel, of course, we won't know about it until later. And I don't believe Preston even knew about it either, or at least remembered that part.
When you focus on August 12th, 1983, does that date feel significant to whatever happened there?
I just keep looking at this number, this specific date, and thinking, I don't know. I just feel like there was something pretty significant happening at that time. I do know that the Cold War had tension very much at that point. I also know in random culture that Every Breath You Take by the Police was a huge song at that period. National Lampoon's Vacation just came out. Jaws 3D. And, newly released Madonna album was part of the summer's pop culture landscape.
So really nothing crazy.
Not really.
Did something go seriously wrong towards the end of these experiments?
I believe that our superhero, Duncan, coming to save the day, witnessed something unimaginable, like children being turned into experiments, really. and being used and not treated very nicely, neglectful, being treated as a number, And I feel like he saw a lot of that, felt bad for those kids, and wanted to put a stop to it.
But you don't think that a beast came through and started ripping the facility apart and eating everybody alive?
I was getting to that point. I believe that Preston thought of the possible ways to make this experiment go awry. And I feel like he thought about it for at least a good 3 weeks. In fact, I think he created this monster in his mind while sleeping so that he could make this happen.
All right, now let's get to the monster.
Oh, yay.
When you focus on the monster from the story, do you see any physical manifesting, or was this all completely fictional?
Oh, yeah. No. Haha. When you create something in your mind, especially a psychic person who has the ability to make things come true, because above and beyond my psychic ability, I've always believed I am somebody who can make something happen as well. I understand I'm psychic, but I also feel like if I speak to somebody and they're going through a rough time, I can somehow maneuver my energy to that person to fix something terrible in their life. Yeah. And I believe that this could happen. I believe that if it was me in that fucking chair, I would have controlled that mofo, got him to turn on all the government people, take the children out of there, and save the world. Oh, and then, record the whole thing.
Right. I mean, you know what? I guess we'll never know. Now, finally, what do you feel actually happened at Montauk?
So many things. Like, I feel like there were, I agree with you. Dinosaurs even being trying to get them to come back. Use that as like something against, the wars. Bringing them back as like helping them. Going to different points in the world, like another country, and stealing their ships and bombs and whatever else to save themselves or kill their leaders while they're shitting on the toilet.
I agree with that, man.
Well, that is it for the Montauk Project today, or at least what we're allowed to know about it and and the things we discussed. But I did want to mention before we go, next week is spooky season,
whoop, whoop.
Which means we are going to be covering very haunty, spooky conspiracies, cases, ghost-related things for the next 2 months. Maybe longer. And I will not be sharing what is coming next because it's going to be a surprise. But anyways, today has been fun, huh?
Today has been great. That has been awesome. This was one episode that I really wanted to do because I just felt like so much of this conspiracy has too much truth and there's too much realness to it that I couldn't ignore it any longer.
Maybe you were attached to this project at some point.
Maybe I was one of those Montauk boys, and I seek revenge on the government.
There you go. Well, that's just a normal day at Us Against Everything, which is why we love the conspiracy of Montauk.
And now we're probably on a government list.
We've been on that list for a while.
Facts.
Let us know what you think. Was the Montauk Project real? Was something happening that eventually became exaggerated into a massive conspiracy? Or was the entire thing just one hell of a story? Because it is always
us against everything.